you've experienced it. A thought appears in your mind about someone you haven't spoken to in years, and within hours they contact you. You dream about a specific symbol, and the next day it shows up 3 times in unrelated contexts. You think of a question, and the answer appears on a billboard as you drive past. Most people call this coincidence. They're wrong. What you're experiencing is synchronicity, and it's not random chance. It's evidence that your consciousness is far more connected to the structure of reality than you've been taught to believe. The dominant worldview you've inherited treats your mind as a sealed biological computer operating inside your skull, isolated from everything except the sensory data that enters through your eyes and ears. In this model, the universe is dead matter moving according to mechanical laws, and you are a separate observer watching it unfold. Coincidences in this framework are statistical inevitabilities. With billions of people having billions of experiences every day, some patterns will overlap by pure chance. This explanation satisfies the rational mind. It keeps everything neat and quantifiable. But this explanation has a problem. It doesn't account for the specific quality of synchronistic events. It doesn't explain why these moments feel different. It doesn't address the timing, the precision, or the meaning that seems embedded in these occurrences. And most importantly, it doesn't explain why synchronicities tend to cluster around significant psychological states, major life transitions, or periods of intense questioning and growth. If these were truly random, they would distribute evenly across all mental states and life circumstances. They don't. Carl Jung, who gave us the term synchronicity, defined it as a meaningful coincidence between an inner psychological state and an outer physical event, where no causal connection exists between the two. This is critical. We're not talking about cause and effect. We're talking about correlation without causation, connection without mechanical linkage. Jung observed this phenomenon repeatedly in his clinical work. A patient would be describing a dream about a specific rare insect, and at that exact moment, that insect would appear at the window. The probability of this happening by chance was astronomically small, but the probability wasn't the point. The meaning was. What Jung understood, and what modern rationalism refuses to acknowledge, is that meaning itself might be a fundamental organizing principle of reality, not just a subjective human projection onto meaningless matter. This is a radical inversion of the standard model. Instead of meaning being something your brain generates internally to make sense of external randomness, synchronicity suggests that meaning exists as a field or fabric in which both your consciousness and physical events are embedded. Your inner state and outer events are not separate things that occasionally align by accident. They are different expressions of the same underlying pattern. This is not mysticism. This is an observation-based challenge to the assumption that consciousness is a local phenomenon trapped inside your brain. If synchronicity is real, and the evidence suggests it is, then your consciousness must be capable of perceiving or participating in patterns that extend beyond the boundaries of your physical body. This has implications that completely restructure how you understand your relationship to reality. The problem begins with the subject-object split. Western philosophy and science have operated for centuries on the assumption that there is a clear division between the observer and the observed, between mind and matter, between inside and outside. This division seems obvious. You are in here, the world is out there, and never the two shall merge. But this is a conceptual framework, not a fundamental truth. It's a way of organizing experience, and like all organizing principles, it highlights certain features while concealing others. Quantum mechanics has already demonstrated that the observer and the observed cannot be cleanly separated at the subatomic level. The act of observation affects the behavior of particles. The measuring apparatus, the experimental design, and the consciousness of the scientist are all entangled with the outcome. This isn't a technical problem to be solved. artsy revelation about the nature of reality. The universe is not a collection of separate objects that exist independently of consciousness. It's a unified field of relationships in which consciousness and matter are interdependent. Synchronicity operates at the scale of human experience, what quantum entanglement demonstrates at the subatomic scale. Your thoughts, emotions, questions, and psychological states are not isolated phenomena occurring inside your head. They are events in consciousness that have correlates in the physical world, because consciousness and the physical world are not separate domains. They are two aspects of a single underlying reality. When you experience synchronicity, you're not witnessing magic. You're witnessing the normal functioning of a reality that is far more interconnected than the materialist paradigm acknowledges. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. This is not a metaphor. The structure of your neural networks is literally designed to detect patterns in sensory input, filter out noise, and construct coherent models of reality. You do this automatically, constantly, without conscious effort. You recognize faces, understand language, predict the trajectory of thrown objects, and navigate complex social situations by identifying patterns and applying learned rules. This is how you function. But here's what matters. Pattern recognition is not purely mechanical. It's not just about identifying what's there. It's about deciding what's significant. And significance is a function of meaning. When you look at a random assortment of shapes, your brain organizes them into figures and backgrounds, objects and spaces. When you hear a sequence of sounds, your brain organizes them into words, sentences, and ideas. The raw data doesn't come pre-organized. Your consciousness imposes structure based on what it deems meaningful. Synchronicity takes this process to a deeper level. Instead of recognizing patterns in isolated sensory streams, you're recognizing patterns that span both your inner psychological state and your outer physical environment. You're detecting correlations between what you're thinking or feeling and what's happening around you. The skeptic says this is confirmation bias. You notice the hits and ignore the misses. But this explanation falls apart when you examine the texture of actual synchronistic experiences. The timing is too precise, the specificity is too exact, the emotional impact is too consistent. These are not vague resemblances that you're stretching to fit a narrative. These are direct correspondences that arrive with a sense of recognition, as if something is trying to communicate. If synchronicity is real, then we need to reconsider what the universe is. The standard model treats the universe as a physical system governed by laws that produce complex structures over time. Galaxies form, stars ignite, planets cool, chemistry happens, life emerges, and eventually, consciousness appears. In this story, consciousness is a late-stage accident, a byproduct of matter organizing itself in specific ways. Consciousness looks out at the universe from inside biological organisms, but the universe itself is unconscious. It doesn't see, feel, know, or mean anything. It just is. Synchronicity suggests a different story. If meaningful patterns can emerge that connect your inner state with outer events, then meaning must be woven into the fabric of reality from the beginning. The universe is not a dead mechanism that accidentally produced consciousness. The universe is a meaning-generating system in which consciousness is a fundamental feature, not an emergent accident. This doesn't require a personal God or a cosmic intelligence with intentions. It requires recognizing that the categories we use to describe reality, matter and mind, physical and mental, are incomplete. There is a third category, a relational category, where patterns of meaning connect different domains of experience. Think of it this way. Information is not just something that exists inside computers or brains. Information is a real feature of the universe. A DNA molecule contains information. A fossil contains information. The cosmic microwave background contains information about the early universe. Information is physical, but information is also meaningful. It points to something beyond itself. It has semantic content. Synchronicity suggests that this meaningful information doesn't just exist in isolated pockets. It flows through the entire system. Your consciousness is not a receiver of random inputs. It's a participant in a communication network that extends far beyond your individual nervous system. Why do synchronicities cluster around certain psychological states? Why do they appear during transitions, crises, periods of intense questioning, or moments of heightened awareness? This is not random. Specific states of consciousness make you more sensitive to the patterns that are always present. Your ordinary waking consciousness operates in a narrow bandwidth. You filter out most of what's happening around you because if you didn't, you'd be overwhelmed. Your attention is focused on practical concerns, immediate tasks, social interactions, and survival-related information. This filter is necessary, but it comes at a cost. You miss the subtler patterns. When you enter altered states through meditation, psychedelics, deep introspection, or psychological crisis, the filter changes, the bandwidth widens. You become sensitive to information that was previously below your threshold of awareness. This is not hallucination. This is enhanced perception. You're not seeing things that aren't there. You're seeing things that are there, but that you normally ignore. Synchronicities become visible not because they suddenly start happening, but because you suddenly start noticing them. This has profound implications. It means that the universe is always speaking. The meaningful patterns are always there, connecting your inner state to the outer world, but you only hear them when you're tuned to the right frequency. Most people spend their entire lives operating in the default mode, filtering out everything except the narrow band of information required for social functioning and material survival. They never tune to the other channels. They never discover that reality is far richer, far stranger, and far more communicative than they've been taught to believe. Materialism is dying. Not because it's philosophically untenable. It's always been philosophically untenable, but because the evidence against it is becoming impossible to ignore. Neuroscience cannot explain consciousness. Physics cannot explain the role of the observer. Biology cannot explain the origin of life. Cosmology cannot explain why the universe is fine-tuned for complexity. These are not small gaps in an otherwise complete picture. These are foundational problems that point to a fundamentally incorrect model. The materialist worldview requires you to believe that consciousness is an illusion produced by neurons, that meaning is a subjective projection with no objective correlate, that the universe is purposeless, and that your sense of connection to something larger is wishful thinking. This is an extraordinary set of claims, and it requires extraordinary evidence. The evidence doesn't exist. What exists instead is a growing body of anomalous data that doesn't fit the model. Near-death experiences, psychic phenomena, the placebo effect, the observer effect in quantum mechanics, and synchronicity. Synchronicity is particularly problematic for materialism because it suggests that information can flow through channels that have no physical mechanism. There is no electromagnetic signal traveling from your brain to the external event. There is no chemical messenger. There is no mechanical connection. And yet, the correlation exists. The pattern is real. The meaning is undeniable. The only way to preserve materialism in the face of synchronicity is to deny that synchronicity happens, to claim it's all confirmation bias and pattern seeking run wild. But this denial requires ignoring the direct testimony of millions of people across all cultures and time periods who report the same phenomenon with the same characteristics. Once you accept that synchronicity is real, you enter a different relationship with reality. You begin to treat the world as a text that can be read, a symbolic landscape where meaning is constantly being revealed. This doesn't mean everything is a sign. It means you become sensitive to when things are signs. You develop discernment. You learn to distinguish between random noise and meaningful signal. This is a skill, not a belief system. It requires attention, openness, and critical thinking. You don't interpret every coincidence as a message from the universe. You notice patterns. You observe correlations. You track what happens when you follow certain synchronicities versus when you ignore them. Over time, you develop a felt sense for what's significant and what's not. This is not magical thinking. This is empirical investigation applied to your own experience. The symbolic language of synchronicity is not fixed, it's personal. The same symbol can mean different things to different people in different contexts. A raven appearing in your environment might be meaningless to someone else, but deeply significant to you because of your personal history, your current psychological state, or your recent dreams. The meaning emerges from the relationship between your inner state and the outer event, not from a universal dictionary of symbols. You are the interpreter. You are the one who must decide what matters. The implication of synchronicity is that reality is participatory. You are not a passive observer watching a predetermined movie unfold. You are a co-creator, actively involved in the generation of your experience. Your consciousness doesn't just receive reality. It participates in shaping reality. This is not about positive thinking or manifestation. This is about recognizing that the boundary between mind and world is far more permeable than you've been taught. Physicists have known this for a century. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics explicitly states that the act of observation collapses the wave function and determines the outcome of quantum events. Before observation, particles exist in a superposition of states. After observation, they exist in a definite state. The observer is not separate from the system being observed. The observer is part of the system. Consciousness plays a role in determining physical outcomes. Synchronicity extends this principle to the macroscopic level of everyday experience. Your psychological state, your questions, your intentions, and your awareness don't just passively reflect reality. They actively participate in which version of reality manifests. This is not magic. This is the natural functioning of a universe where consciousness and matter are two aspects of the same underlying process. When you change your inner state, you change your relationship to the field of possibilities, and different events become probable. Synchronicities are the visible evidence of this participatory relationship. Modern culture is experiencing a crisis of meaning. Depression, anxiety, addiction, and existential despair are epidemic. People feel disconnected, isolated, and lost. They've been told that the universe is meaningless, that consciousness is an accident, that there is no deeper purpose or pattern. They've been taught to ignore their intuition, dismiss their direct experience, and trust only what can be measured and quantified. This is soul death. Synchronicity offers a way out. It provides direct personal evidence that meaning is real, that the universe is responsive, and that your consciousness is connected to something larger. You don't have to take anyone's word for it. You don't have to believe a doctrine or join a religion. You just have to pay attention. You have to notice the patterns. You have to treat your experience as valid data instead of dismissing it as subjective noise. This is a radical act in a culture that denies the reality of consciousness, to trust your own experience, to follow the synchronicities, to treat the world as meaningful. This is an act of rebellion against the dominant paradigm. It's also an act of sanity, because the materialist worldview is making people insane. It's stripping life of significance and reducing human beings to biological machines executing genetic programs. This is not just philosophically wrong, it's psychologically toxic. It destroys the soul. Synchronicity points toward a more integrated understanding of reality, one that doesn't split mind from matter, subject from object, or self from world. It suggests that these divisions are artificial, that they're conceptual tools we use to organize experience, but that they don't reflect the underlying unity of existence. When you experience synchronicity, you glimpse this unity directly. For a moment, the boundary dissolves. You see that your inner world and the outer world are not separate domains. They're different facets of the same process. This understanding has been present in contemplative traditions for thousands of years. Buddhism speaks of dependent origination, the idea that all phenomena arise in relationship and that nothing exists independently. Taoism speaks of the Tao, the underlying pattern that connects all things. Hinduism speaks of Brahman, the unified field of consciousness that manifests as the diversity of the world. These are not religious beliefs. These are experiential reports from people who have investigated the nature of consciousness and reality through direct observation. What's new is that Western science is beginning to approach the same conclusions from a different direction. Quantum mechanics, systems theory, ecology, and consciousness studies are all pointing toward a relational, interconnected, participatory model of reality. Synchronicity is one of the bridges between ancient wisdom and modern science. It's a phenomenon that can be experienced directly, studied empirically, and understood conceptually without requiring you to abandon rational thought or critical thinking. Understanding synchronicity changes how you live. You become more attentive. You notice details you would have previously missed. You treat the world as alive, as communicative, as worthy of careful observation. You ask better questions. Instead of asking why things happen to you, you ask what the pattern is trying to show you. Instead of treating obstacles as random bad luck, you examine them for information. This doesn't mean you become passive or fatalistic. It means you become responsive. You learn to read the feedback the universe is giving you. When synchronicities align with a particular direction, you pay attention. When they consistently block a particular path, you reconsider. This is not about giving up your agency. This is about using more information to make better decisions. You're still choosing, you're still acting, but you're doing so with greater awareness of the larger patterns in which your choices are embedded. You also become less lonely. When you realize that reality is responsive, that meaningful patterns are connecting your inner state to the outer world, you understand that you're not isolated, you're not a separate fragment of consciousness lost in a hostile universe. You're a thread in a vast web of relationships. The universe is not indifferent to you. It's speaking to you constantly through synchronicity, through dreams, through symbols, through the events of your life. You just have to learn the language. Synchronicity is not a curiosity. It's not a minor anomaly that can be safely ignored while maintaining the materialist worldview. It's evidence of a fundamentally different kind of reality than you've been taught to expect. It demonstrates that consciousness is not confined to your skull, that meaning is not a subjective illusion, and that the universe is far more intelligent, far more communicative, and far more participatory than the mainstream scientific narrative acknowledges. You don't have to believe this. You can test it. Pay attention to the coincidences. Track the patterns. Notice when your inner state correlates with outer events. Follow the synchronicities and see where they lead. Treat this as an experiment, not a faith. The data will speak for itself. The universe is speaking to you directly. It always has been. The question is whether you're willing to listen.